What's going on, guys? Browsers here. So today we will have a video that I was intending to do for a while, and this is still pre-patch of the Untitled Elves, pre-patch of the 2020 balance update, and we will talk about the tier list for the armies, but for the beginners. So which army is the easiest to start with, which army is the hardest to start with, and I will try to work on figuring that out in this video. Hopefully you will enjoy it, because I've received a lot of requests about it, a lot of questions on, well, which army is the best for when I start, which army is the worst, which army I will have good time with. So let me try to answer that in this video. What I'm taking into the account in this video are basically three main aspects, I think. First of all is susceptibility to bad leadership checks. So low leadership means a lot of panic checks that you can fail, and if you misposition your general, your BSB, then it's really easy to start losing games because of that. Second of all is positioning. How easy is it to get a good positions with the army, pretty much regardless of the list, but in general, how easy it is to position it, to figure stuff out. And the third one is how easy it is to fix if you mess up something. So if you are in a bad spot, then can you help yourself in any way? Can you, for example, declare flee, which I think will be the main aspect in this question. So yeah, first of all, ogre cans. Okay, solid heroes, not bad leadership. Usually you will have 8, but you will buy either the Crown of Autocracy or Discipline, or you will sometimes maybe bring even a Great Khan if after some updates he will be more playable. You also have a lot of single models, but the single models that are not worth that much and that don't need to pass the leadership checks. You have a very hard-hitting units. Your units also take the charge pretty well. So I think the ogres are pretty easy army to start with. So I would probably put them somewhere in tier A. Orcs and Goblins. Okay, this army is much more bricky. So it is much slower than the ogre cans. It usually uses either multiple smaller units or just few massive units. Some monsters just sprinkled on top. You have a choice of shooting. That's also nice. But the problem is always leadership. The problem is playing correctly with things like Nashers, with things like Fanatics. So that's definitely not the easiest army to play. But still, I feel like because your bricks again can take charges, you can, well, you don't necessarily are able to flee because a lot of your stuff is feral. So I was wondering between tier B and C, but probably because of the lot of rules that the army has and the lot of complications and a lot of interactions, then probably this is maybe a C tier pick. So okay, so I will leave them in C tier, and maybe I'm gonna mention that, but S tier means that the army is easiest to play, D tier means that the army is hardest to play. So probably Orcs and Goblins somewhere between B and C tier, so let's leave them in C tier. Sovereign Ancients. This is a rough one, I think. Okay, first of all, I don't value this army that much nowadays, but that's a whole different story, I think. The other problem is that you can play kind of two more main play styles. One which has like Temple Guards and Caimans and so on. That is a bit more bricky. That's easier to play. That you just push your units and then you magic your opponent to death and good stuff might happen. But the other playstyle, which includes like Stegadons, which includes like a lot of small skink units, this is definitely much harder. So I don't know. Leadership is great. Like leadership 8 on a slan with a reroll is great. On flanks, even if you leave your skinks alone, this is leadership 5 on 3 dice. This is also great. So I think I will leave them in B tier. They seem harder to play than Orcs and Goblins for some reason to me. But definitely easier to play than Orcs and Goblins, but definitely harder to play than Ogre Khans. Silvan Elves. Okay, that's either C or D tier. The problem is that you have... it's nice that you have your shooting, but your shooting cannot kill that much. It can kill a lot, but it cannot kill that much. Then you struggle to fight for the scenarios. Well, nowadays you can play very aggressive Silvan lists that have just a lot of mobility, and that your opponent has to more be worried about it. But bringing a balanced list in Silvan Elves is mildly rough. Bringing a very shooty list is not good. And bringing a list that is very aggressive just doesn't seem to fit Silvan Elves for me. Like, I would rather play armies that are more aggressive naturally than play aggressive Silvan Elves, to be fair. So, actually, let's put them at D tier, because pyromancy and cosmology, that are pretty much very common now, are very good against this army, and I think that it's really hard to play Silvan Elves for the beginner. Also, your opponent will get a lot of covers because cover rules are stupid, and yeah, it's just hard to pick up this army, I feel. Vampires. Okay, so this is one of the armies where this third aspect comes into play, because when you mess something up in vampires, it's basically like domino. You cannot flee anywhere. Your units crumble one by another. If your opponent gets a good charge, if you fail some stupid charge, then it's really bad. I think this makes it one of the hardest armies to pick up. Either C or D tier again. I think what is annoying for most opponents is the raising. So if you are playing a positional game, then vampires are probably easier for the beginners because they can heal what they lose. But if you play a very aggressive and open games, which is usually the games that you play at the lower level because you just go kill your opponent, then the vampires are really hard, because again, one mess up and it's unsalvageable. So also an interesting choice. Also, your units basically cannot really take charges, and you don't see that many builds with like Lamia Court or something nowadays, because like enemy cannons are stupid, and then putting like 1500 points in a court is just not good. Let's actually leave them at C tier, because I think it is easier to play vampires when you start. Oh, maybe not. Is it easier to play vampires when you start than Silvan Elves? Probably not. I will then go to the D tier. Okay, and the cousins of vampires are Undying Dynasties, but Undying Dynasties have much more solid units. Like, for example, unit of 6 snakes, unit of 4 Morgas, very popular also units of big blocks of skeletons, before units of chariots, also units of Shaptis. All those units are very strong. They can take charges, they can deal massive damage, they are not really dependent on your movement. You don't need to, you don't have that many options of conga lining, and using a lot of tricks that push vampires to the very high level at the top level of play, because you cannot raise above the starting limit. You cannot create new units with Undying Dynasties. Also, Undying Dynasties naturally can have some shooting, which vampires lack. So I would definitely say that Undying Dynasties are much easier army to play than vampires. But probably because you still cannot flee, and probably it's between tier B and A, and I think I will put them, I don't know, probably in A tier actually, because when I look at the other armies, well, you cannot flee, but also you cannot fail the panic test. So yeah, probably tier A is okay for them. Beast Heads. Okay, that's a pretty easy tier S pick for me. Your units are fearless. Your units hit really hard. you have to just push your army forward and good stuff will happen. You have ambushes that are not very hard to use, but very hard to deal against for your opponent. So if your opponent is a beginner, he will find it very hard to deal with the ambushers. You have no shooting, but you maybe can have some shooting with Hawthorn Curse, with some Cyclops. So in general, I feel like the beast herds are just very easy to start and pick up and pick up. Demon legions, okay. Fearless army, but again very strong, similar to beast herds. You cannot fail panic checks. Your units like 5 upward anywhere can basically save you very often. So I don't know. It's either tier A or tier B. Your heroes are also really strong. You have a decent amount of flyers. It's just an army that also wants to, like, nowadays kind of like beast heads that wants to go in the face of the opponent. I would put them in A tier because maybe they have a bit harder access to chaff than for example beast heads. Beast heads have excellent access to chaff, although at the very starting level of play probably you don't use chaff all that much because the concept might not be very easy to get from your very first games. So anyway, I think demons in tier A are okay. Dread Elves. This is a rough decision, but I would say that, well, in current patch they are super strong, so it's not hard to play them at all, I think. But when the new patch hits and they get nerfed a bit, then yeah, this is a very fragile army with very close range shooting now with very hard hitting units, but very soft. So again, either C or D tier, and I already put 2 things in the D tier. I think it's easier for the beginner to actually play the Dread Elves than the other 2 armies. So I will keep them in the C tier, just because your units are very strong, and then you can flee. You have decent leadership, so all this should be good. Dwarfs. This is a very easy army to play, maybe because you don't have much decisions to do. Like, all you have to do is pick a corner and deploy on it, and then just don't move at all, and then you're good, right? But no, in all seriousness, with the amount of bodies that the dwarves pick, it's actually, I think, probably the best army for the beginner to take as many points as they can from a very good player. Because it's very hard to pick points on the dwarves that don't want to lose those points. So I would say, again, probably S or A tier. I think we can stick them to the S tier because, well, we'll find it hard to catch the opponent, but you just if you understand that you don't need to catch the opponent and you just need to wait for the opponent to come to you, then yeah. It's a much easier game after all. Okay. Empire. I would say it's pretty clearly C tier. The leadership is not bad, but you have to pick, well, leadership is just not bad unless you pick the altar as your general, which gives 18 inches leadership, but leadership 8. So but in general, on the flanks, you might have some problems with leadership. Your units are not that strong. You can flee, but pretty much nobody will set up counter charges on the beginner level. I'm not even talking about the support parent unit interaction, but counter charges in general. So I think that this army will be pretty hard to play. It's kind of like dwarves in a sense for the beginners, I feel. But it just doesn't have this durability, this strength of like Kingsguard or something. Yeah, I just don't think that this is easy army to work with. At the top level, it's an excellent army, but at the beginner level, I think this is pretty rough. Highborn Elves. Okay, that's super leadership all around the world, very good shooting. Unfortunately, your special units kind of suck, like special infantry, so you have to rely on things like monsters, things like Griffon, which is one of the strongest models in the game nowadays. I would say in the end, this is not a super easy army to play, because the scenarios might be an issue. If you don't know, like Seaguard are probably the main choice for the core and probably will remain as that for a while, the big unit of Seaguards. But setting up cover volley, knowing which fights to pick, this is all rough stuff. And also, since, well, many beginner players, rightfully so, decide to copy the lists from better players. Better players often either don't use the BSB because they have divination, or they use the BSB, but the spells then are pretty mediocre, and you just have to understand the ideas that are behind the list, which is not very easy, I think. So I would definitely leave them at the B tier. Infernal Dwarfs. This is like dwarfs, but better. So if I pick dwarfs in S tier, then like, why wouldn't I put the Infernal Dwarfs in S tier as well? That's an interesting question. Because Infernal Dwarfs in general are just better dwarfs. Like, there is no doubt about it. There is basically nothing that the dwarves can do that the Infernal Dwarfs cannot. So, I don't know. Very, very shaky. Also, like the core Great Weapon Infernal Warriors with fighting extra rank is ridiculous. Yeah, so probably again S tier for the starters. Kingdom of Aquitaine. It's mildly list dependent, but I would say that just roll a lot of armor saves and you can get out of any situation. Fleeing is very hard with the Kingdom of Aquitaine because you will often find yourself off the board. But your quests can take a lot of charges. In general, you have a very fast unit, so it's more of a problem for your opponent than for you. So I feel like, well, it's definitely not the easiest army to play, because playing with an army that's sometimes dependent on charge, well, things like Grails or things like Realms, especially with the Bundle of the Last Charge, they are very charge dependent. Although they can still take the charges and just stay there with the 2-up armor and some ward saves, so probably A tier pick. Yeah, that would be my guess. Vermin Swarm. Yeah, that's definitely one of the harder armies to play. Because very low leadership. It is kind of like Orcs and Goblins, but even worse in the terms of leadership. Even worse because you basically cannot have small units unless those are like disciples that can take ranks from the Plague Monks. Your shooting is great, but it's also not that easy to get good ranges for shooting with like mechanists, with weapon teams. Picking stuff like Grenadiers doesn't help, although Grenadiers not very used nowadays, but maybe it will change. I think it's also pretty clearly a C tier pick. This is decently similar army to Orcs and Goblins, I would say, in many ways. Although it has to play in even more bricky sometimes than Orcs and Goblins. And if you decide to go for things like Pendulum or Demon, then, well, if you are not careful with your Demon or with your Bell or with any general that you have, then yeah, the lack of leadership, lack of magic, after you lose it to some lucky cannon shots is just terrible. Okay, and we are left with Warriors of the Dark Gods. And I'm super tempted to put it in the B tier because it would look so nice, but let me actually think about it. No, definitely not D tier. Strong pushy army, similar as Beast Hearts. No ambushers though, no fleeing, no panics, pretty much no options for shooting. Definitely not S tier. It's either A or B tier. I still think it's A tier. Very, very strong units. Easy to just push forward. You can take charges decently well. Your heroes are strong, although they usually don't have that many attacks. So, for example, the Beastheart's Chariot, Beastlord on the Chariot, is much easier in the sense that, well, he can heal and then he has a lot of attacks, so he will never die from combat resolution. But here you have this This +1 CR for each model. A tier or B tier again? Very hard to decide. Yeah, I still think it's A tier. Okay, so this is my tier list. It doesn't look very balanced, does it? But in the end, I think, well, kind of the message that you can get from this tier list is that offensive pushy armies, please go to the top. Defensive armies, frail armies, shooty armies, go to the bottom. Yeah, and I don't think that this is hard to realize this, because it's very hard to score scenarios with the armies that have hard leadership to manage, so they cannot play very far from each other, that have shooting, so they want to. So if you just start the game, you are very tempted to held backwards, but that's not the way to go with defensive armies. If you play a defensive army, then you push forward, because it makes no sense to stay back, because then you will lose all the scenarios. So, yeah, let me know, guys, what you think. Hope you enjoyed this, and see you in the next one. Cheers.